at a point in time coming off of a wild Saturday of college football. People are consistently peeking over at this board. He actually would not be my number one overall pick, nor would I bet him to be the number one overall pick. I think you got that next wave of NFL players, which is so enticing, which when you see Jaden Daniels come into the NFL and you go, I can get something like that with a guy with just as good an arm.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome into college football today. It's time for the post-game show as promised throughout this entire day. But more importantly, many great games to get into, many do-or-die situations to break down. And I'm not going to do it alone. No, Kasey Hudson here with Dubs Anderson to run you through the Saturday slate per usual and get you up to date on what's going on. We've talked about the importance of these games heading into this weekend because the regular college football season is getting ready to come to a close. We're talking playoffs, we're talking potential bowl opportunities, and so much more. Dubs, how's it going? Are you ready to dive in and start creating, I don't know, somewhat our own playoff picture?
Absolutely, Kasey. Less than a month out from the big dance, a couple of big results, big standout individual performers, and a couple of results that are still right in the balance here late on a Saturday evening. So always enjoy catching up with you. I do have my top betting card, my top starting five, if you will. I know we're going to get into that a little later in the show, but a lot in the balance, and everything right now has a little bit extra juice to it. So it's very exciting.
Absolutely. There was a few things that I decided to take a play on, but I didn't do a full betting card quite yet. I don't know what my hesitation has been. So you might end up back in the hot seat, but it's okay. Rich will alleviate some of the pressure as we move through post-game show. Now, a quick update on some of the scores that are getting ready to get in the books here. We know we had a big showdown between Tennessee and Georgia. First quarter would have told you a different story than what I'm about to tell you right now. Georgia on top, 24-17, currently with the ball first and 10 at Tennessee's 15. 2:38 left in the fourth quarter, so this can remain Georgia's game. Some things that have been an impactful plays, per se, when it comes to this matchup. Carson Beck, 331 through the air, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. So he is broken, for now, the curse that has been Carson Beck in the turnover category. Frazier on the ground, 66 rushing yards through 18 carries, but it's Humphreys in the air. London Humphreys, that is, 3 receptions, 63 yards. Those chunk plays coming in big time. We know Delp has been the guy to find the end zone primarily for Georgia as well. But as this game gets ready to wrap up here, Dubs, what are we seeing out of Georgia, who this was a do-or-die situation for them, a must-win over Tennessee?
Yeah, it really was. And from what we've seen the last couple of weeks, the Bulldogs have been showing a great attitude on the sidelines. 24-17 right now, 2:38 left in the fourth. They went off a 7.5-point favorite, so it looks like They're going to cover that one. 46.5 was the total. But from what we have seen from Carson Beck, it's been a little inconsistent all season long. 24 for 39, 330 passing yards. So I guess he's had a really strong game. I am Aliva. I know, Kasey, you've had a very better chance of trying to pronounce that name as we've moved through here. The first 12 weeks of the regular season hasn't been good enough for the Volunteers. The offense has really been stagnant, especially here in the second half. They've struggled to put up any points coming out from the break. They put up 10 in that first quarter, but since then the offense has really looked a little stale. The rushing game has been strong early, but since falling behind, they've really struggled to get back into this thing with that passing attack. And for Carson Beck, it's really a measuring stick. We've been having question marks all season long in college football. Is this a genuine Heisman contender? Are the Bulldogs a genuine national contender for the Natty? And they haven't looked thus far, but right now, 24-17, they're in command of this one, and they're going to pick up a couple of style points. If they can close this one out, this is a massive win over the Volunteers. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so they're at a really good chance of doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. You did great with it, Dubs. Leva is where I think that I landed with that one. But I've still heard it. I've still heard it in a number of ways, and I give up. I prefer Nico anyway. But yeah, and plus you're just seeing more high-spirited movement from Carson Beck as well, so it doesn't look like he's very much in his head, and that's a big thing to shake off considering the theme of his play all season long. So if he can close this one out, keep a clean slate when it comes to the turnovers, he's going to have a pretty large chip on his shoulder to carry him throughout the rest of this regular season and hopefully into some big postseason play. The script was for Samson to be the ground horse for the Tennessee Volunteers, and for the most part, he was able to do that, but you said it. Georgia kind of coming in stout there. They're not ranked 12 for no reason. 101 on the ground currently, so anyone who had that over 95 or 97.5, as well as that touchdown, at least you got some pay out of all of that. Now, some of the other games that are currently going on, especially when it comes to some playoff positioning, we had Oregon versus Wisconsin. Wisconsin in control all the way up until the fourth quarter where the Ducks pick up 10 points because heading into halftime, it was Wisconsin on top. And you thought for a minute that this was going to probably be a closed door. Oregon hasn't particularly had this much, let's just say, adversity within one game to have to face. You got Dylan Gabriel, 218 in the air, one interception. On the ground, it was JJ, as I now like to call him, Jordan James being the workhorse here, 121 on the ground, one rushing TD, and then Evan Stewart through the air to help out Dylan Gabriel and his yardage there. But for the most part, what did we get from this one? Because you say that at one point, not you specifically, but fans say that at one point you got to really put a good team to the test. And while perfection was almost tested here by Oregon, they probably got the largest pushback that they've gotten all season.
Absolutely, Kasey. And I'll put the hand up and say, I've been on the bandwagon here for the Ducks all season long. I really do think they are the best team in college football, but this has been the biggest test that they've had over the last month. It is never easy going against the Badgers over there at Camp Randall Stadium, and to just close this one out 16-13 to cover that 3-point margin as the number one team in the nation. They really went missing there through the second and third quarter. They just couldn't get that offense going. And Dylan Gabriel, star quarterback for the Oregon Ducks, considered to be one of the top three choices in the Heisman market. He is still my number one vote. He was fantastic. He was efficient. He really couldn't get that deep threat going, but he also kept the turnovers off the board. And I think that ultimately was enough to fend off a very stoic Wisconsin Badgers. They came ready to play. They're 5-5 for the season. They're 3-4 in conference play. If you're looking at the Big Ten conference standings, I still think it's the Oregon Ducks as the team to beat. In terms of what they had going in their favor, they got off to a nice start. They tried to lean on that run game. They had Jordan James go for 25 carries and 121 rushing yards, and also making a house call there. This wasn't a flashy game. They're certainly not going to pick up any style points, but this looked to be everything of that trap game. On the betting side of things, we always look to a game like this where maybe you fend off an opponent who you think they're lesser than, who comes ready to play, and they're booked as 13.5-point underdogs at home. The Badgers showed up. They were trying to play the bully ball, but it wasn't enough. Oregon Ducks came into this week number 12, number one ranked in the nation right now, and they proved to be that by just edging them out 16-13. And Dylan Gabriel certainly didn't lose any stock for me in that Heisman conversation.
Yeah, he still was able to pull off the W and get over 200 passing yards, which works in a number of ways. A lot of credit, though, to Wisconsin, what they've pulled off this season after losing their QB1 back in September. That is, they kind of had to restructure and reframe what their offense was going to look like and how they were going to prevail. Defense has come in tough in a number of ways as well. Quick score update here. We got Kansas versus BYU. BYU picking up 3, so they're still trailing Kansas up 7-3. Second quarter, 14-11 left remaining. Now, going back to the top of the day, we'll come up against a break here shortly, but another big matchup that took place and showed some adversity for a team to have to overcome. Texas versus Arkansas. Texas does come out of this one 20-10 being the closeout there, but you got Quinn Ewers, who didn't even break 200 passing yards, which is why I use that as a mark or a standard when it comes to still rooting for Dylan Gabriel. 176 through the air, 2 touchdowns, no turnovers. Blue on the ground, 83 rushing yards. Bond in the air, 48 receiving yards. What do we see out of Texas today versus Arkansas?
All right. Longhorns still sitting at 9-1. You like that, Kasey? I thought you could appreciate that. Hey, they got the win. It's never easy going against the Razorbacks. If you look at the numbers here for Quinn Ewers, not a fantastic box score, just with 176 passing yards. He still had 2 passing touchdowns. This was a very gallant test here from the Razorbacks. And for the Longhorns, I thought they were fantastic last week. I thought there was always a bit of chance of regression. They didn't have to win this game by 20 or 30 points. They just had to get the win, survive, advance, move on to the next one. I thought Blue and Bond were fantastic there for the Longhorns. And Quinn Ewers, he's doing enough to stay in the conversation. The Longhorns hook him 20-10. They get the result. Advance.
Together, both Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the 2 big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, it's going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid, Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Grandma Bear, who owns the football team, probably comes in, gives a little, oh, man, you're such a good little boy out there. Congratulations, the way you coach this football team. I'm never going to fire you.
Totally, I missed you. Pinching your own cheek? Because I was looking down and did not know we were getting...
Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there with that guy named Ben. Like, that's what your grandma would do to you when you go here on Thanksgiving or Christmas,
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back into college football today, the post-game show here on SportsGrid TV. Y'all know the deal, running through the Saturday slate, but more importantly, starting to paint the playoff picture. I mean, have I alluded to it enough? I love this part of the season because everything is on the line. There's teams that can sneak into the playoff conversation, but more importantly, you kind of see where these bowl games are going to start to stack. We know a number of bowl games have come into the picture so that you can let those teams that had great seasons but probably are not in the greatest conferences have their moments to shine. So we have so much to unpack and get to when it comes to how this postseason is going to look for a number of college football teams, and more importantly, that playoff picture. So currently, let's rally around the scoreboards at the moment. Tennessee losing the grip here in this game as Georgia stacks more points. Currently, I'm seeing Georgia on top 31-17. Tennessee with the ball, 2nd and 5 at Tennessee's 43. Then halftime for Washington State and New Mexico, 28-14, while Washington State stays on top. Then Kansas and BYU. Right before we cut to the break, the score update remains the same. Kansas on top 7-3 over BYU. Can they break their perfect stride? BYU 9-0 heading into this matchup at 6-0 when it comes to Big 12. And has Kansas just been the sneakiest team out there? Honestly, they started off the season, I'm pretty sure, 0-3, number one. Number two, you did not expect this team to be able to shake up defensively and hold a number of teams down in any sort of level or scoring competition. And if they pull it off versus BYU tonight, I owe Kansas and fans many apologies. Then you've got Oregon and Wisconsin, which Dubs and I just discussed. 16-13 was the narrow escape for the Oregon Ducks and their Heisman leader, or Heisman potential, because it's not over till it's over. Ohio State, way earlier in the day, 31 over Northwestern, topping them 31-7. Texas and Arkansas is where Dubs and I left off, 20-10. It's these gritty performances that count the most. You're looking at us starting to line up the playoff picture. We've talked about it a number of times throughout the day here on college football today. But just to put it in a reference before I go back to one of my favorite games of this Saturday slate, Boise State right now, ranked 12 heading into today, looking to pair off with Ohio State, ranked number 5. Notre Dame, ranked 9, looking to pair off with Tennessee at 8. Now, this is where things can shake up a little bit, especially with Tennessee looking to fall to Georgia. Currently, you see Ole Miss potentially taking on Penn State. What a freaking game that would be. Ole Miss has been considerably one of the most underrated teams in a number of ways. They weren't particularly going against many ranked teams to begin with, so we weren't sure where or how to even evaluate them. Jackson Dart, though, you get past a certain number of these games, getting out of the regular season. This is a guy that I really want to be at the top of the Heisman conversation for a number of reasons. He's that athletic quarterback that you just enjoy watching play football. So they have the potential to take on Penn State. You guys know what I think of Penn State's defense. They're punishing, they're bruising, they're big, they're great, and that could be a great matchup between Ole Miss and Penn State. And then the other bracket that looks to be potentially set, depending on what changes here come November 30th, Alabama versus Indiana, and that's another big test going to come all the way full circle. The fill-ins to be determined: BYU, whomever, Texas, whomever, Miami, same thing, Oregon, same thing. So a number of these games count big time for these teams, and that's where we'll start to see what will the expectation will be in the postseason. Now, circling back to one of my favorite games of the day. Why? Well, South Carolina has also been one of the top teams flying under the radar. Shane Beamer made a comment to say, we don't care if we're being underrated. We don't care if everyone's not acknowledging what we've done this season. We really just don't care. And that's probably one of the best things and mottos to have as you continue to prevail game by game, stopping some of the best teams out there. And while this one started to go back and forth for a minute after halftime, South Carolina comes out on top 34-30 versus Mizzou. How did we get this going? Well, I mentioned that close call in the beginning before halftime came about. Tigers were down by 1 point. Gamecocks 7-6 in the first quarter. Then comes the second quarter. It's all South Carolina picking up 14 points. Heading into halftime, you thought that they were just going to come out, completely put a stop to any progress that Mizzou's offense would try to get going. Not the case. Mizzou comes out the stronger third quarter, picking up 6 points, but then South Carolina closes the door. What played in? What was a factor in this game? The main thing that I enjoyed talking about, South Carolina's defense. Now, you see 30 points and you're thinking to yourself, what defense, Kasey? They let 30 points come about. Yeah, well, fatigue kicks in when you're doing the most work in that first half. But regardless, this is still one of the top defenses in the SEC. May I re-riddle you a couple of things? They lead in sacks, tackle for losses. They're ranked third in the nation. They do a number of things so well defensively, and that's why they've been able to compete with the best of the best. And it's always great to talk a big underdog story, and I think the South Carolina has been just that. So it'll be interesting to see what their postseason begins to look like. Also, to just add to all the things that you could love about this matchup, Sellers, 353 through the air, 5 touchdowns, 5-to-1 ratio when it comes to touchdowns and interceptions. Duh, you're going to love that. And yes, it makes for great football. Sanders on the ground, 53 rushing yards through 19 carries, but you didn't need him to go off on the ground game, that's for sure. And then who was matching pace in the air? It was Campbell who ended up leading the wide receiving room at the end of the day. That's with 86 receiving yards through 2 receptions. So just imagine the chunk plays between Sellers and Campbell to make that happen. If you guys did join us earlier on College Football Today, or maybe even in-game live halftime report, one of the top things that I said makes South Carolina so special is the potential target share. You've got 3 guys with 60-plus receiving yards. So considering this, you got Campbell closing out, 86 receiving yards to 2 receptions. Simmons, who was leading the room, 76 receiving yards through 4 receptions, and then Harbor, 69 receiving yards through 2 receptions. But why not leave it to just me? Why not bring in Rich to break down what he saw in maybe this game and all of the other games, and more importantly, the playoff picture? Rich Cirminello, everybody, I'm so excited to chat with you because I feel like so many great games, so many do-or-die moments took place today. I mean, just dive into this topic with me. What did you think of Missouri versus South Carolina?
Yeah, Kasey, great to be with you as always. This was a schedule that didn't look like it had a ton of marquee games. Tennessee, Georgia wrapping up now was the biggest one, but it was a weekend that has not disappointed. Kasey, I have been blown away by South Carolina. 4 straight wins, last 3 over ranked opponents. They came through big today. Redshirt freshman quarterback Lenoris Sellers, not 1, not 2, not 3, 5 touchdown passes. Kid looked fantastic, including the shovel pass at the end to Rocket Sanders for the win. So South Carolina is not going to get to the SEC title game, Kasey, but they might be the hottest team in the league right now.
Yeah, they're definitely making the biggest case to say, wow, we just paid attention a little earlier. This could have been something different, but it's clearly not always all up to them. And they had a couple games where they didn't secure the W, but they kept it interesting. So this and so many more games, as you mentioned, turned out to be some of the most interesting ones on the Saturday slate. We'll dive into all of it on the other side of this quick break that we're coming.
Together, both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the 2 big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Grandma Bear, who owns the football team, probably comes in, gives a little, oh, man, you're such a good little boy out there. Congratulations, the way you coach this football team. I'm never going to fire you.
Totally, I missed you pinching your own cheek as I was looking down and did not know we were getting.
Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there with that guy named Ben. Like, that's what your grandma would do to you when you go see her on Thanksgiving or Christmas,
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back into college football today here on SportsGrid TV. Kasey Hudson and Rich Cirminello to run you through the Saturday slate. Rich and I are on the same page. It's been such an exciting roster of games today for a number of reasons. There's probably not too many games that you had circled on the calendar, but turned into probably the most entertaining games. And regardless, a lot of these games held a lot of meaning because the playoff picture is starting to mold itself, but it's not concrete yet. We still have, 2 weeks left in the regular season. So I have to ask this now that you and I are running through the slate together. We started talking about South Carolina and Mizzou. We were talking about that performance, narrow escape for South Carolina, but a hard-fought win, 34-30. What was your favorite game today?
I'm going to have to go with Wisconsin and Oregon just because I didn't expect that one to be so competitive. I know folks who like points, and if you had the over, I'm sorry. That was a 16-13 final. But, Oregon got tested, and we didn't expect it. Now, the Ohio State game a few weeks back, of course, 32-31. That was supposed to be nip and tuck. That was supposed to be a 60-minute battle. But struggling against Wisconsin was a bit of a surprise. Love that crowd in Madison. End of the third quarter, you just can't beat, jumping around. I love that Oregon was getting involved in jumping around with the Wisconsin fans and the Wisconsin players. I like this for the Ducks, Kasey, because it shows that in a low-scoring game, Dylan Gabriel did not look Heisman worthy in this game. I think Travis Hunter has begun to build an even bigger lead in terms of being the Heisman favorite at this point. But seeing Oregon play kind of a backyard brawl, an alley fight, surviving, even though it looks ugly, Kasey, I think this bodes well for Oregon down the stretch, ultimately in the Big Ten title game and in the playoffs.
Absolutely. And I was talking to a number of the guys here on the network about it because after the Lions nearly fell short to the Texans, Dan Campbell said these are the kind of wins that you need. You have to figure out how to adjust and how to have this adversity in a game and how to not have your best football ahead of you but still come out on top. And it's those gritty wins that kind of help you out, have those bigger successes in the postseason. And I feel like that applied to today's game for a number of the top teams that we're seeing around the nation right now, Oregon being one of them. They didn't have as much competition. They weren't facing ranked teams in the beginning. Their defense was still kind of letting up more points that you're comfortable with, but you couldn't argue their performance. Today was a perfect example of that, and a big shout out to Wisconsin because, again, they lost their QB1 in September. They've still been able to push a number of top opponents against the ropes, and it was great football regardless, and a big win either way for Oregon. And kind of sticking with that theme, moments ago I was breaking down Texas versus Arkansas. Texas comes out on top 20-10, but you're talking about another Heisman candidate that maybe didn't have a Heisman-worthy performance. A gritty win to get out on top. Ewers with 176 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, not a bunch of turnovers or anything crazy, but probably one of his lower passing yardage props that we've seen thus far this season, right?
Yeah, it's a great call on your part. That's an excellent parallel because it was a similar type of situation. Oregon going to Wisconsin, heavy favorite, challenge till the end. Same thing happened with Texas against an Arkansas team that has shown that they can pull upsets. Taylon Green, the quarterback, has had big games. Sam Pittman has probably saved his job this year. But the fact that Texas got dragged for 60 minutes and really had to pull that one out late, I think bodes well. But I think in the case of the Longhorns, I have some concerns about that offense because Quinn Ewers has been up and down since he returned from the abdominal injury. They don't have the weapons that they did last year. Isaiah Bond may be one of the exceptions. Their tight end, Gunnar Helm, has played well this year, but they don't have a lot of field stretchers. They've gotten very young and banged up in the backfield. So Texas, as they inch closer to what appears to be an SEC title game appearance, I think they have some problems on offense that Arkansas was able to expose. Now, survive in advance, great win for the Longhorns. That's an old Southwest Conference rivalry in Arkansas, but I saw some warts that could come back to haunt them once we get to early December.
Absolutely. I think you make a number of great point outs in that one, especially when it comes to stretching the field, because you use the term they got exposed by Arkansas, and I think it's brilliant because Isaiah Bond, he was limited to under 50 receiving yards, and typically in any sort of tight contest for Texas, you're looking for the big plays between Ewers, or even if it happens to be Manning, and Isaiah Bond. He's the guy, but it was blue on the ground that really helped this offense be more progressive and compete. But for the second quarter and the third quarter, almost non-existent, and then I love the fact that you said dragging their feet. If it wasn't for Texas defense, we were looking at a completely different score, let alone a completely different victor at the end of this one. So a number of teams that were against the ropes today and a number of teams that pulled off some gritty wins. But regardless, we're going to take a look at the potential playoff picture, maybe get into this Heisman conversation yet again, and so much more. Don't go anywhere. Stick with us here on SportsGrid on the other side of this quick break.
Together, both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the two big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, it's going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Grandma Bear, who owns the football team, probably comes in, gives a little, oh, hey, you're such a good little boy out there. Congratulations, the way you coach this football team. I'm never going to fire you.
Totally, I missed you. Pinching your own cheek as I was looking down and did not know we were getting.
Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there with that guy named Ben. Like, that's what your grandma would do to you when you go see her on Thanksgiving or Christmas,
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Back at it with college football today here on SportsGrid TV. Post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Rich Cirminello to run through the Saturday slate. All of the impressive wins, narrow losses, and so much more. So let's continue to roll through it all, Rich. Currently, with some score updates, I told you guys that halftime was going down for Washington State versus New Mexico. Washington State up top, 28-14. BYU gets the lead, 10-7, leading Kansas. Kansas currently with the ball, 3rd and 1 at BYU's 28 is what I'm currently seeing. So those are some of the top games taking place right now. But we were talking about tight competition. We were talking about entertaining games. I think that's a perfect way to pivot over to Arizona State versus Kansas State. Kansas State, I think the expectation was much higher than what we've seen. We've also seen them kind of have these slow starts to games and then try to get in and it either be a little too late, or they do end up pulling off the comeback victory. Former Mr. Gatorade at the helm, Avery Johnson there, but Arizona State takes the win today over Kansas State. And what a battle that one was. I'm trying to get the update on the score, but Rich, let me know your thoughts in that matchup. 24-14 was the victory for Arizona State.
Yeah, Kasey, it has flown somewhat under the radar this year, and I understand it's Big 12. ASU's not going to, in all likelihood, barring a collapse from BYU or Colorado, they won't be in the Big 12 title game. But it's really important to evaluate in year two what Kenny Dillingham has been able to do in Tempe. First season last year, 3-9. Took the offseason to build in the portal, got Sam Levitt from Michigan State, his quarterback, retained Cam Scatabo, one of the best dual threat running backs in the entire country, former FCS player from Sacramento State. And these guys are now 8-2. And to go into Manhattan as an underdog and beat Kansas State, that is a huge win for Arizona State. They still have a game against Arizona. for the Commonwealth Cup. This is a team, think about this, year 2, Kenny Dillingham, one of the youngest coaches in college football. This could be a 10-win regular season. We could be talking about ASU 10-2 going into the postseason, major bowl game, not playoffs, major bowl game. I mean, I'm just really blown away at how quickly they've been able to turn things around. Again, using the portal, using player development. It's one of the really good stories. We talked in the last segment about South Carolina and what Shane Beamer is doing. Kenny Dillingham probably doesn't win Coach of the Year. That seems like that's going to be for Curt Cignetti at Indiana. But, man, he's a top 5 candidate for the job that he's done with the Sun Devils this year.
Absolutely. And also another great point out with that, because for starters, I feel like this season there's a number of coaches that you can put in that conversation. I mean, you have Indiana, you have Shane Beamer, you have Sun Devils head coach as well. Which head coach has impressed you the most in terms of the roster that they came into the season with, how they manipulated that roster, and the success that they've either had or let's just say the adversity that they've had to overcome to even be in any sort of competition this college season?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great. I happen to love a chatter about Coach of the Year or the jobs that coaches are doing, whether it's assistants who might be up for the Broyles Award or National Coach of the Year. There are a number of them. Curt Cignetti, I think at this point, no matter what happens next week against Ohio State, very strong candidate for National Coach of the Year. How about what Jeff Monken has done at Army, candidate for National Coach of the Year, still with a big game left against Notre Dame, and the Black Knights are undefeated at this point. We haven't talked about Coach Prime. I mean, earlier today, I know it's a depleted and banged up Utah team. It's not the typical Utah team that we're used to. Colorado now 8-2 and really just steamrolling into the Big 12 title game, legit shot to be a playoff team. We talked about it last Saturday night. At that time, I said Colorado is 4 wins away from being in the playoffs. Well, that's now down to 3 wins. Win the next 2, beat BYU in the Big 12 title game. You're talking about Colorado as a number 4 seed. But let me throw one more out there, which is a team that is currently under 500. I really think we need to throw some love to Billy Napier at Florida, because these players could have quit on this coach. They lost their starting quarterback. They briefly lost their 5-star backup quarterback in DJ Lagway. By all accounts, it looked like, and I was saying it too, so shame on me. In September, I was like, hey, here are the next candidates for the Florida job. He has been retained for 2025. Huge win over LSU. I thought they were fantastic defensively. Shamar James, Tyreek Sapp, both had huge games in the front 7. And, he's not going to win SEC Coach of the Year. He's not going to win National Coach of the Year, but he's doing a phenomenal job in keeping these kids motivated. Now he just needs one more win to get to the postseason. With the schedule that Florida had in the second half of the year, nobody thought they were going to be bowl eligible. They're now 1 win away. They still play Florida State, which is a dumpster fire down in Tallahassee. So, yeah, I mean, Florida looks like they're going to be bowling. So I just love the job that Billy Napier has done in Gainesville this year.
I think that's a perfect ad, because I will say this. Confession time. I don't think I've ever said so many nice things about the Florida Gators as I have today and probably last week. And I know my family is like, what are you doing? We are Seminoles. But outside of that, look, you got to give credit where credit is due. And honestly, I was just extremely impressed by the game plan and the buy-in. And that it takes a good head coach to get the buy-in from these kids and not let disappointment derail their play. And seeing the buy-in and how they played versus Georgia up until Lagway got that injury in the mid-end of the second quarter, they were in full command of that team. Georgia only got that win because it just seems like air left the tires the minute that Lagway gets carted off, and then you have these other injuries and bang-ups that happen throughout. And then you've got another young kid coming in at the helm. So to be able to prevail past that and keep pushing through the quarterback carousel that has been the Florida Gators, their defense has been tremendous, and I expected a big defensive performance out of them. Key turnovers versus Nussmeier. That started early in the first quarter. That was a momentum swing for this team, and they were just able to keep pushing from there, and defense just continued to get hype and excited. Strong secondary, strong linebacker room, and strong win for the Florida Gators today. All right, my kindness to the Florida Gators has to cease and desist, but they do have Ole Miss coming up. That'll be a great competition November 23rd, and then Florida State, it's rivalry week. Whenever it's Thanksgiving, you get a belly full of food, and then you get a lot of rivalries, and hopefully you don't have a house divided going down at that moment. A number of the teams, though, that you have just mentioned kind of goes back to this potential playoff picture. I was asking Rich during the break if he saw this. So it looks like the playoff picture started to formulate on November 12th. Article went up today, earlier this morning. So let me know your thoughts thus far on what I'm seeing starting to formulate. You got Boise State 12, potentially taking on Ohio State. Then you got Notre Dame 9, potentially taking on Tennessee, which is ranking 8 on here. And then on the other side, Ole Miss versus Penn State, Alabama versus Indiana. Which one of these scenarios seems more realistic?
Well, I'll tell you which one is really entertaining for me, and that's Ole Miss Penn State. I've been on the Lane Kiffin train now for the past couple of weeks. I said it last week. I'll say it again. Ole Miss on a bye this week. They come back for that big game next weekend. I love the makeup of this team because they have all of the key elements that you're looking for in a championship squad. Great defense, not good, but a great defense. This is a legit SEC defense, giving up around 12 or 13 points per game. You've got the veteran quarterback in Jackson Dart, enough weapons in the backfield and on the outside. And again, the success they've had this month, Kasey, that is without Trey Harris, not just their best wide receiver, but arguably before he got injured, the best wide receiver in the country, certainly the most productive one. And you have a veteran head coach, a crafty head coach in Lane Kiffin. So they are really set up for something special. And on the other side is Penn State and sort of that dark cloud hanging over the Nittany Lions, which is, can they beat an elite team? Can they come up big under James Franklin? I would love to see that game. And big picture, before we go to a break, I just love the concept of the playoffs right now because we're going to see some matchups that we never did in the past. This is going to blow away the old traditional bowl system.
Absolutely, and I think that's going to end up playing out to the purpose behind putting a playoff system in the mix here. And then those other bowl games are going to bring in some teams that deserve the recognition and illumination of their play. So far, the way everything is panning out, I'm a big fan of it as well. But you touched on exactly what I was hoping you were. I'm just excited to see how Ole Miss continues to produce and roll because a lot of people counted them out in the beginning of the season, said their schedule was too easy, but it's just getting better and better. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us here on College Football Today, the post-game show on SportsGrid.
Together, both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the two big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, it's going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid, Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Grandma Bear, who owns the football team, probably comes in, gives a little, oh, man, you're such a good little boy out there. Congratulations, the way you coach this football team. I'm never going to fire you.
Quarterly, I missed you. Hinted your own cheek as I was looking down and did not know we were getting.
Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there with that guy named Ben. Like, that's what your grandma will do to you when you go see her on Thanksgiving or Christmas,
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the game starts so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
back at it with college football today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Rich Cirminello, running through the Saturday slate, but more importantly, starting to figure out what the potential playoff picture can look like. And Rich and I were just talking during the break, and I wanted to carry this conversation on air for a minute. There's not a clear picture to a national champion at the moment. I love that you mentioned that because I feel like it's just adding to the excitement around college football, or at least bringing a lot of excitement back into college football. We were also talking about all the chaos and confusion that came from COVID. You got 6- and 7-year seniors playing. So kind of piecing things together from what we've watched and covered all season long. We were just talking about Ole Miss taking on Penn State, but what would you say is probably the team that can sneak into the mix for the playoff picture that was never kind of considered beforehand, now that we have some new meat in the mix for playoffs?
Well, the one that jumps out to me, I mean, it's not, I'm not really out on a limb here because they're undefeated, but the Indiana story to me has really captured the imagination of not just Big Ten fans, but really fans across the country. And I love the fact that IU, a basketball school, I have friends in Bloomington who are just, they're over the moon with excitement for what this team has been doing. And for me, it's more of a big picture type situation. I think I've said it in the past, but it bears repeating, which is you could make the right coaching change. Like if things seem dire right now, if your team is under 500 and they're struggling, that one correct coaching change, in the case of Indiana, Curt Cignetti, and then the ability to go into the portal and find the right mix for your offense and defense. Offensively, Curtis Rourke from Ohio, comes from the MAC. Is a maybe top 5 or 6 candidate for the Heisman. Mikhail Kamara, Curt Cignetti brought over the edge rusher from James Madison. He ranks among the nation's leaders in tackles for losses and sacks. So what Indiana's doing right now is potentially a blueprint, Kasey, for other programs, smaller programs.
Yes.
Look at Vandy and all of the excitement they've had this year. A lot of that is related to one player, Diego Pavia. So it's the times that we live in college football. Forget about rebuilding. You don't need 3 or 4 year plans. Find the right leader. Find the right coach that can go into the portal and rebuild a roster. And, man, you can rebuild on the fly. And that's what we're seeing with Indiana.
Yeah, we're going to start to see more of a buy-in over rebuild theme as long as this continues to be successful, which it just makes for a better storyline. And obviously getting these new meats in the mix, it's very exciting and it's great to see. Kind of sticking along the lines of Indiana, the picture that I'm seeing right now, again, none of this is concrete, football fans, but they're projecting Alabama versus Indiana. Now, I think this is a great matchup because we really haven't been able to put our thumb on what this Alabama team has been this season. They've pulled off tremendous wins. They've had narrow matchups. They've just had a number of things going on. And then you're almost spotting perfection with Indiana. So let's play Nostradamus for just a second. What can we potentially foresee if this ends up being the matchup between Alabama and Indiana?
I love the coaching matchup, first off. I mean, Curt Cignetti used to be an assistant at Alabama, so he knows the program. He knows Tuscaloosa. He knows the expectations. But two of my favorite coaches right now, Cignetti at Indiana, Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. It's been a bit of a rocky season. You set it up perfectly. There have been ups and downs, both offensively and defensively. Do we really know what to expect from Alabama, even after last week's LSU win? I don't think so. I don't think they're a complete team. I think they're going to get to the playoffs. I think they have enough quality wins this season. That's not going to be an issue. But that would be a phenomenal matchup. I mean, two electrifying quarterbacks, Jalen Milroe for Alabama, Curtis Rourke from Indiana. Love the coaching matchup. Obviously, Alabama has the pedigree. Indiana's never been in a playoff discussion before. This is their best season since 1967. You're talking about, almost 6 decades that Indiana has been this good. I would lean towards Alabama just because a lot of these players have been in that setting before. But I probably would be rooting for Indiana just because I tend to be a Cinderella guy, and it would be fun to see IU get a playoff win under their belt.
Yeah, I'm always rooting for the underdog, so I'd be right there with you. Another projection that I find very interesting, Boise State versus Ohio State. We've seen more consistency out of Ohio State. We almost saw Boise State lose to San Jose State today. I mean, it wasn't until the second half of that game that they were able to finally pack some points on, more importantly, break a tie and all of these things around. So late momentum out of Boise State, potentially taking on Ohio State that seems to be rolling pretty hot right now. What would we potentially see with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think for fans, Kasey, I think it's a great opportunity to see the best back, maybe the best offensive player in all of America, Ashton Jeanty, the Boise State running back, against an elite Ohio State defense, a defense that's filled with future NFL players. I think that would be the game within the game that everyone would want to see. But I'm starting to believe, and I'd love your take on this. I kind of think there are programs like Ohio State that may saunter into the playoffs. I think there's so much talent. The expectations are so high. They've been here before with Ryan Day, at least getting to a playoff situation. I wonder if Ohio State's getting a little bit bored of the regular season. I mean, that was not an impressive beginning of the game against Northwestern today. I think Ohio State's the kind of team that once we get to the playoffs, that's when you're going to see the best Ohio State. So I don't think Boise State would hold up well against Ohio State. They would stack the box. Maddox Madsen, the Boise State quarterback's done a nice job for a Mountain West quarterback, but they would force the quarterback to beat them. You would see 7-8 guys in the box, and I would not be surprised if it was a stat line for Ashton Jeanty of something like 24 carries, 58 yards, and no touchdowns.
Absolutely. And plus, I just think that I completely agree. We've seen so many lackluster performances out of Ohio State, and it's not for a lack of talent or capability. It's just kind of one of those things where it's like, oh, we're facing Northwestern today. Like, let's just get past this one. I think where we saw the most fire was the Ohio State versus Penn State matchup. And there was just a number of storylines attached to that, on top of the quarterback wanting to go to Penn State, feeling rejected and wanting to prove, hey, you should have had me to begin with, but I'm going to show you what it would have been like to have me on your roster. So I think that we are going to see a whole different gear out of Ohio State in the postseason. I think they can prevail versus that past that first round. And I think we see a different Will Howard as well, because we've seen when he can turn it on, and we've seen when that offense chooses to have more of a balanced attack, which maybe that applies to boring sometimes. So a couple more playoff pictures to paint, not to mention Heisman conversation, national championship, and so much more. Don't go anywhere. Stick with us here on the postgame show on SportsGrid.
Together, both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson had huge nights. Aaron Rodgers loves the two big targets, and he says if this is going to happen, going to be very tough on the defense to decide who they want to go after.
Adams and this kid Wilson, I won't deny what they can do, but nobody else does jack.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Grandma Bear, who owns the football team, probably comes in, gives a little, oh, man, you're such a good little boy out there. Congratulations, the way you coach this football team. I'm never going to fire you.
Told me I missed you. Pinching your own cheek? Because I was looking down and did not know we were getting...
Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there with that guy named Ben. Like, that's what your grandma would do to you when you go see her on Thanksgiving or Christmas,
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start, so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
one more rally here in college football today, the post-game show with Kasey Hudson and Rich Cirminello. I mentioned running through the Saturday slate, but more importantly, more fun, actually, starting to paint the playoff picture, seeing what we can expect. We got one more matchup to kind of preview here, take a futuristic look at, and then let's see what might have shaken up when it comes to the Heisman odds as well as the national championship odds. So one of the last ones I want to get your opinion on here, Rich, and this one's more interesting to me, especially after seeing Tennessee fall to Georgia just moments ago. You've got Notre Dame, which on here ranked number 9, taking on Tennessee, ranked number 8. Now, Notre Dame has been an interesting team to keep tabs on throughout the season. Tennessee's script can almost be they haven't particularly had the healthiest roster. They've got a lot of young guys with expectations to carry this team. But what could we potentially have a Nostradamus moment about Notre Dame versus Tennessee?
I'm so happy you brought up Notre Dame. Even in the break, I was going to say, like, hey, Kasey, let's talk about Notre Dame. They have actually, for ND, right, one of the most known programs in any sport, they have basically flown under the radar since week 2. I think the last time anybody was really talking about ND was when they lost to Northern Illinois, when they were upset by Thomas Hammock and the Huskies. And since that point, all they've done is regroup, refine their offense, largely on the running game, whether it's Jeremiah Love or Riley Leonard, the quarterback. The defense is exceptional. They've had some tough losses. They lost one of the best cornerbacks in the country in Benjamin Morrison. In his place, Leonard Moore, true freshman, has been phenomenal, trying to work his way into freshman All-American type of honors. So Notre Dame is interesting to me because they're actually a little bit beneath the radar, but playing very well. And in year 3, Marcus Freeman looks like he's maturing into a really big-time coach. Like, that's the expectation. He's got all of the tools as a teacher, as a recruiter, as a mentor. He's got everything, but was still young when he replaced Brian Kelly. So ND is really interesting to me when we get to playoff time. Now, Tennessee, you lose between the hedges in Athens. I think they'll still be in the playoff picture, but obviously can't lose a game, can't stumble to Vandy at the end. That would be an interesting matchup.
Yeah, and then some of the parts of their play that just kind of started to fall apart there. While Georgia has been good in some of their moments and played well, I just felt like there was moments where Tennessee kind of beat themselves there, but maybe that's where more inexperience came into play versus, Georgia being in a do-or-die moment. So kind of a lot to unpack from that game, but needed some time to let it all settle in, that's for sure. Notre Dame flying under the radar. They did not like it when Northern Illinois put a beating on them, and that has shown game in and game out. We've talked about a number of Heisman candidates through all of today's matchups and then this semi-playoff picture thus far. You mentioned Travis Hunter earlier in the show. He's now taking the lead when it comes to the Heisman conversation. Minus 370 is his current number, but then you got Ashton Genty, as also mentioned, plus 360. Cameron Ward still hanging on there in that third spot at 15-1 odds. Dylan Gabriel kind of moving down the rank a little bit, plus 3,000, and then you got Curtis Rourke plus 3,000. Jalen Milroe 33-1 odds. What's the most impressive movement here when it comes to the Heisman candidacy?
Yeah, the separation of Travis Hunter. I think it took the media and it took, I won't say voters because we don't know voters' opinions at this point or what their ballots will look like. But the consensus right now is that people have gotten really comfortable with the idea that Travis Hunter is just exceptional. And we talked about it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Like we've normalized what Travis Hunter is doing in Boulder, which is odd because he is abnormal in a very good way. I mean, we have never seen a dual threat two-side player like Travis Hunter. I mean, he is top notch as a wide receiver, unbelievable ball skills. We saw that earlier today against the Utes. And an elite cornerback as well. I mean, what he's doing is incredible. One thing I want to throw out, by the way, I was thinking about it when I was watching the Purdue-Penn State game. How about a dual threat tight end? I mean, I'm blown away by Tyler Warren, not suggesting he's going to get into the Heisman discussion, although I think he might be top 10. But have we ever seen a dual threat tight end? This guy ran for 63 yards today and had over 100 yards receiving. He is going to be a phenomenal NFL tight end.
You won me at tight end. It's my favorite position for a number of reasons. The athleticism. You got to be able, or at least you used to have to be able to put your hand in the dirt, come up with the big block, but also go out for those routes and make some magic in the middle of the field. But most importantly, I love to see any sort of shakeup in the Heisman candidacy. Rich, thank you so much for bringing your knowledge, insight, and expertise to the conversation for the post-game show. I hope everybody has a wonderful and safe rest of their Saturday, and we'll catch you back here next Saturday to continue breaking down some college football.